House Intelligence Committee Chairman, Democrat Congressman Adam Schiff, tells NBC's Meet the Press that more work needs to be done in the impeachment inquiry. But he says there already is enough evidence to move on to the next step.
It's important to know we're not stopping, but it's also important to know this, Chuck, and you've acknowledged this, and I find this remarkable. The evidence is already overwhelming, right? The evidence is already overwhelming.
So for more reaction on Mr. Schiff, Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin joins us. He represents New York, is a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee from the 1st Congressional District on Long Island. He's been very prominent and outspoken in his defense of the president. Congressman, good to see you. First, the reaction to this breaking story about the emails. I mean, what does that say to you? If they have emails in the White House counsel's office, supposedly overseeing or looking into the legality of this?
Sure, but we do have an overwhelming amount of evidence to why there was a hold on aid to Ukraine. I would call on Adam Schiff once again to release the deposition transcript of Mark Sandy. Mark Sandy is a dedicated career servant at the Office of Management and Budget who came in to answer questions with regards to why there was a hold on aid to Ukraine. There is an overwhelming amount of evidence. We know that it wasn't until the end of August, after a Politico story, August 29th, that President Zelensky and his top aides confirmed that there was a hold on aid to Ukraine. We have an overwhelming amount of evidence that also tells us that that hold was released shortly thereafter and that Ukraine didn't have to open any new investigations. They didn't have to announce any new investigations in order to get that hold lifted. We know that President Trump was going to meet with President Zelensky on September 1st. If not for Hurricane Dorian, Vice President Pence went in his place. But just a few weeks later, President Trump met with President Zelensky at the United Nations. I could go on. I mean, I could spend the next 20, 30, 40 minutes here just laying out all the overwhelming evidence that shows that the president was concerned about corruption in Ukraine, that U.S. law requires the United States by law and policy to ensure that Ukraine is combating corruption. The president was concerned about 2 legitimate cases regarding Burisma and Zlochevsky, as well as Ukrainians interfering in the 2016 election.
Well, you know what the Democrats say, and what Schiff said today, that there's overwhelming evidence, in his view, of wrongdoing by the president. But he did, in one interview, he did stop short of saying whether or not he's decided on moving forward with impeachment.
Well, we have already subpoenaed him for documents, and we're in discussions with the Southern District of New York. So we are pursuing it, but at the same time, we'd like to know what the documents have to say before we make a decision about witnesses. This is why we've subpoenaed Pompeo for documents and others for documents.
That's him talking about Lev Parnas and Rudy Giuliani and that sort of thing. So, what's your reaction to that, and that they've wrapped this up and now it goes to the Judiciary Committee?
Yeah, his mind is made up. And the people who are pushing for impeachment have been pushing for impeachment since Donald Trump was elected, since he was getting sworn into office. Adam Schiff really does think that many Americans are idiots. If you remember March 22nd, 2017, he goes on another network and he says that he has more circumstantial evidence that President Trump colluded with the Russians. This is evidence that he hasn't yet produced. I haven't seen, Mueller couldn't find. When the acting director of national intelligence came in front of the House Intelligence Committee, he made up what he called a parody version of the 725 call transcript, but he only said that after he got called out. And then he also said that he wasn't in contact with the whistleblower, him and his team, but he'd like to be. And then it turns out that his team was in contact with the whistleblower before this person had even filed a whistleblower complaint or had even hired an attorney. And then it's gone on during these open hearings where he's made claims during his opening statements and his closing statements, trying to write the world's greatest parody, trying to fool the country, trying to connect dots that aren't actually connected, utilizing 3% of the story. Now, what he won't tell you in some cases, he'll say something's a firsthand truth that shouldn't be doubted, and then you dig deeper and you realize it's actually Ambassador Taylor telling us that Tim Morrison told him, that Sondland told Morrison, that the president told Sondland. Give me a break. The firsthand actual truth, the facts are on the president's side. We should be passing USMCA. We should be lowering the cost of prescription drugs. We should be delivering for the American people, but instead he is trying to pay off the people who put that gavel in his hand, who put that gavel in Nancy Pelosi's hand, and it's really infuriating a lot of us who want to see progress.
He was asked in one of the interviews about the lack of a direct testimony from the president directly in dealing with holding up the military aid, although, of course, you have that phone call Sondland was on that apparently was overheard. Here's something else that a Democratic congressman said, blaming it on you guys, the Republicans. Here he is.
First, they hung their hat on there's no evidence of a quid pro quo. Then there was overwhelming evidence of a quid pro quo. Now some are hanging their hat on, well, what's your evidence that the president withheld the military aid? The president's own chief of staff has admitted they withheld the military aid to get this investigation, this crazy DNC server investigation, which is part of a Russian disinformation campaign.
So finally, Congressman, what would your reaction to that be? And what do you think Republicans can have in their own report? Because apparently they can file their own report, I guess as a minority dissent, one would assume.
Well, fortunately, we have the other 97% of the story to use for our report. And then, I mean, with regards to Ambassador Sondland, when he said that there was a quid pro quo linking aid to investigations, he then admitted that it was a presumption. He said it was a guess, that the president never told him that Rudy Giuliani never told him that. No one on the entire planet told him that. He had no evidence to back it up, even though the president of the United States had told him that there was no quid pro quo, that he was not demanding anything from Ukraine. With regards to where we go from here, and Adam Schiff is challenging the president. Now, listen, if precedent means anything, back when Bill Clinton was being impeached, Ken Starr, who was the independent counsel, presented his case to the House Judiciary Committee, and President Clinton's attorney had the opportunity to cross-examine Ken Starr. In this case, if Adam Schiff considers himself the prosecutor, the judge, the jury, the witness coach, the chief strategist for lying and leaking, and everything else that goes with his conduct over the course of these last few months in dealing with this, then that report that he's drafting, he should present in person to the House Judiciary Committee, and that President Trump's counsel should have the opportunity to cross-examine him. Adam Schiff has some answers that he needs to provide. There's some questions that I'd certainly know that many of my colleagues would want to ask him, and the President's counsel would as well. The problem is that his case is going to fall apart. It's not just about protecting the whistleblower. He's trying to protect his own hide. He's trying to protect people like Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, who went to the whistleblower, obviously, and that's where the case is going to just continue to fall apart if he shows up to answer questions. That report is super thin, and it's going to blow up upon cross-examination.
Oh, those are all the questions, and we'll see what happens in the judiciary. And of course, if indeed it does get to a Senate trial, and see what happens. Congressman Lee Zeldin of the 1st District of Long Island, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Eric.
Of course.